I came back from a 3-week trip to Europe, an intuitive calling, and a recognition that travel reveals the miraculous nature of life and the constant truths of your forward motion eternally. There is no such thing as waiting. It doesn't exist. Don't try to make that a way of life, because you are living a lie when you do that. You are constantly progressing and moving forward, and the question is towards what? So today's going to be a lot about some of the most important concepts that I believe are poorly iterated. And if these concepts are integrated, what ends up happening to the individual is something that's happened to me. And I want to share a little bit about that experience. A lot of what we're going to be getting into is some of the deepest wounds I've had in my life are really wounds of love. And it's very, very difficult to navigate those kind of wounds, especially if you're not willing to take it to its divine core. And I had this video about 4 weeks ago about, the fear shows you your potential. And you would love it because you can watch that one and then you could watch this one. And you could recognize that was somebody who was talking about something, and this is somebody who knows about something. And I recognize the difference between a conceptual understanding and a coherence between your mind and your heart. And I can call that faith. That it's a much deeper knowing. It's revealed to you how things work, not how you've made things work. And there is so much liberation in the face of that. So I was looking for something. I set out on this trip and I recognized what are the few things that I wanted to do. Well, you don't really get to see yourself until you remove yourself from your environment. And there's something really seductive about the nature of the environments that you're in. And so I'm going to get into a few of the stories that happened to me personally because I think they're really, really funny. And I don't know, there's just this taste in my mouth of life, a life that I've forgotten, and a love that I'm constantly surrounded by. And the nature of the things that hold you back are typically constant and haven't been addressed. And that's what creates underlying depression or anxiety. And I've spoken very openly about my depression and getting into a place to where I'd be open to face this. And so when my grandmother passed away, she left me with a message, and that message was to live like a king. Now, I really didn't know what she meant when she said that, but I did understand that that had to do with love. The nature of anything presented through the feminine is in relationship to what you are worth. And what you are worth is a question of, are you enough? And as I start to think about it now, that definitely has to be one of the things that we're going to get into here. So I'm going to put that at the bottom. This is going to be longer, so buckle up. I mean, there was so much I wasn't ready for because the nature of what I was trying to prove to myself is that I am in control of everything. You're not in control. In fact, actually, that's an illusion. And I could say this now with a level of understanding of what exactly are you in control of, and are you really free? So, well, she sent me this sort of dying wish, like live like a king. All right, well, then that means to embody royalty. Well, I don't know anything about that. I maybe know something about money. And so a lot of this is actually also going to be about wealth and what exactly you're willing to sacrifice in order to come closer to what you truly value. And it's hard to accept what you truly value because maybe if you could accept that you are enough as you are now, then everything that you are pursuing, what for? If you were to be like everyone else, and that's what your ego would tell you because it wants to separate you from everyone else to validate your feelings of, not being enough. So you're going to create like a narrative that you're somehow significant, and you're significant because you have these underlying inadequacies that you're willing to resolve, and that's what makes you unique. And so you're living with this insecurity driving your life, a deep inadequacy being what's driving you. What if you're enough now? Then of course you're enough then. Yeah, that changes the way you live, because then it means, what are my actions in service of? I've created an arbitrary direction in my life, and I've made that my aim. And I have this pseudo direction, and it's not actually direction. It's just every single way to avoid my insecurities and inadequacies. And I was feeling this really deep loss, the loss of her. And I kind of recognized, well, this loss of her is also recalling of aging. I'm getting older. And as I'm getting older, my parents are getting older. And as they get older, I have less and less time with them. And then the nature of what I dedicate my time to started to become more of how deeply can I show up to the people I love is a question of presence. And also what's limiting you from that. I was afraid of leaving my parents' home, of leaving my life. And I think even most importantly, leaving all of these identities that would never be challenged unless you were to face the unknown. I talked a lot about those fears because that was me, I guess you could say, priming for the thing that you could never prime for. And it's going to be called the unknown. You do not get prepared for it. You do not get ready. There is nothing you have. There is only one thing you can take in it. And it's going to be a deeper intention of who you want to become through it. And you could return to that intention and you could recognize that if I had a goal to turn my life upside down, from this upright I've had it my whole life, to recognize something that runs deeper inside of me, that controls my every action and my every instinct and is blinding my intuition. I want to see who I really am. And that became a really real question to me, especially after some of the conversations I've had with people on my YouTube. And if you watch those conversations, they've all been super impactful in relationship to, I don't know who I am. And I feel deeply depressed. And maybe that's something I could start with. And so I've done a lot of this work, and I wouldn't compare myself to anybody else. I will just speak for where I was and how I've improved. Her dying wishes were more than a dying wish to me. They were a direction, a call. And I sought out, I will make this commitment. I'll move out, I'll start my events, I'll get my own place, and I'm going to live like a king. Well, I'm also going to start embodying travel. And I noticed that there was something about that that deeply terrified me. Well, I got to see who I am. And if you want to know what that looks like, well, think about what intimacy is really revealing of. Because the nature of modern relationships, which I tie in a lot of this to relationships, because honestly, it's all connected to relationships. You're going to be aware of the one relationship that dictates your whole life and is going to be the basis of all meaning, the basis of all adventure, the basis of all love. And I believe you have adventure, you have love, you have meaning. And there's one more. Freedom. This relationship will quantify every single little bit of freedom, adventure, love, and meaning you have. And this is going to be the basis of your decisions in your life. And I had enough of people trying to say that these things work, these tactics, a bunch of these bullshit ideas. They do not work. They only work in a short amount of time, because what you're doing is you are reducing the variables of life and you are training yourself to look at something that is not true as a way to dictate your truthful behaviors. I promise you that's a loser's game. You will have nothing left to yourself. You will have nothing left to your name. You'll be another bereft person that's living the overcorrected delusion of themselves. A reactionary life, a life of fear. And a lot of this is going to be talking about fear and the nature of why is it so important. And so look, this might take an hour, it may take 2 hours, but I promise you it won't probably take longer than that. Because I'm going to say it as much as this needs to be said, and I want to communicate it from a place that I have brought home with me. And what I feel that I've embodied a lot more of is this, there's this grace, there's this understanding, there's this deeper knowing. And so I had a few intentions to set off. Well, to start my trip off. Well, the first intention was live like a king. I knew that was one. The other one is I want to learn faith. I'm here to learn how to let go of control, which was probably the most terrifying thing I've ever done. I'm here to learn surrender. And I recognize something about surrender. And the masculine's relationship with the feminine is in relationship to the intrinsic feminine. And in a lot of ways, that's how they understand God. And the same thing goes for women, is that it communicates to them as a guiding masculine force. And Carl Jung talked about the anima and the animus and the soul. And to be real with you, I've become aware of that thing we call a soul. Oh, I mean, it's absolutely changed every fiber of my being and has given me a serenity and a peace and a grace with an ability to never lose play in the face of severity. No matter how serious, there's play. And that means I'm learning. Wherever there's that, I'm learning. I'm also a little sick today, yet I felt that this was something I really wanted to do because I feel called to it. It flows through me. And here it goes. Let's get the business flight, right? Because you got to live like a king. And, well, personally, I just don't think you should reduce yourself to the lowest common denominator, and you should experience what it's like to actually fly, which is through business. And personally, you won't be treated like the Auschwitz survivor in World War II. From the beginning of this trip, there was a deep underlying anxiety that I was having. And it was, is this what I'm supposed to do? Is this why I'm here? And I also made another commitment, which is I am not going to stop working, taking care of myself, and doing the things that I would do here. Because I don't want to reinforce this idea that a lot of people have. It's a vacation. Now, to say that there isn't an importance to rest, it's one of my values. It's something I've learned to integrate. And I mean, oh my God, I should probably write down another thing of an incredibly important value that I just had. Well, maybe I'll have to break this up into episodes because it's going to have to be. And that's what you truly value. And that's not English, but it's for me anyways. Okay, you get it. It says what? It's terrible, but it means what you truly value. So I was interacting with a few things, and I like to kind of let the videos that I have kind of speak for themselves as we go forward, because I really want to show you one of the most important things, which is the ability to show up in the presence, to embrace these parts of yourself, and to allow them to transform as the process of transformation. And there is no better version of yourself in the sense that you are constantly removing yourself from this underlying inadequacy. No, is that you're elevating the truest of you and taking steps towards that, and that is an act of love. So there is no progress in any action you take of rejection, of hatred, and real creations through love. Now, these things are things I've learned on my trip. I created this whole Europe trip because I had this intuitive calling to go to Germany. And it wasn't just anywhere in Germany, it was the Black Forest. I was always inspired by the fairy tales and the folklore and honestly the culture, and more transparently, the women. And because there's an intensity I like, there's a culture that I like, a sophistication I like, and I always felt called to it, but it was intuitive. I didn't even know that the Black Forests were in Germany, but I knew that that was an intuitive thing. I remember talking with my friend, I was like, oh, it's probably in Germany. Because I noticed a lot of the best psychologists in the world, they were German, and a lot of the stories that were inspired, because the whole story culture really of fairy tales is originated in Germany, and of course other places have that, but some of the works like Faust and some of the greatest thinkers and psychologists originate from there. And so there was a pull, an intuitive pull, and a deep curiosity. And you guys can understand something about intuitive, and this is going to be really important, is that intuition is something that exists on its own. It's not there to protect anything. And that's the thing about a desire. You might have a lot of resistance to feeding that because it would challenge everything that you have up at the moment, which is not true, and it's not authentic, and it's a lie. But an intuitive drive is what's pulling you. So this intuition to go there, and I said, you know what? I'm going to have this whole trip. A list of things were lining up. And I noticed with the money that I had at the time, and I was using this as a way to kind of get down to these underlying beliefs, because I promise you this was something really, really important about what you're willing to spend. And it's also what you're willing to sacrifice. And I recognize that things of value, are you willing to give them up? And so I had a certain amount of money saved up. I won't get into the details of that, but I will share that I was willing to spend every dollar in order to get closer to this truth of why I was here on this trip. And that was not possible for me to do unless I was able to understand every little list of character deficiencies in relationship to what I wanted to get closer to. And so there's a tremendous amount of asking for help that goes around. It was only 3 weeks, felt like a lifetime. In fact, I still feel like I'm on that trip and I'm on that journey, because that journey was never relative to the plane that I got on. It is something that I'm constantly existing. And I'm going to continue for the rest of my life. Get to Paris, where I start. And my biggest prison was my habits. Well, of course, my life turned upside down. I would usually start my day in the morning, have my lectures then. Now I'm having my lectures at night, and so I have the whole day. I also get to recognize what exactly I'm looking for and what I'm trying to get closer with. Of course, the second you get out of one environment, you want to recreate the environment you just left into the new one, and good luck with that. And, well, I wish I told myself that earlier, so I guess this is me from the future with a little more clarity that everything's going to be already worked out. Everything has already worked out. just finding my cold brew, because that's like some sort of like mechanism of control, and you'll love this, that all mechanisms of control are really an inability to let go and surrender to the thing you cannot control. And then what that gives you is faith, because that's something you can control. And now, faith is not something you prove to yourself. No, it's something you discover about yourself. So it's not a enforcing of something. It is a discovery of what always has been. And perhaps maybe you have a lot of expectation of how things need to go. So the classic thing is that the trip needs to go like this. I need to find the perfect hotel, and this is going to be the 5-star place, and then I have to do this, and of course it's going to be the pretty girl somewhere. And I'm living out with this whole James Bond fantasy, which I think is just really funny, because I couldn't even just walk to a cafe and go, oh, this looks nice, sit here. Everything became an existential conversation because this deep need for control was destroying my life. Now, what I found interesting about the need for control is that what I've spoken about a lot in my lectures is the integration of something on a divine level means the integration of something in the present, which means it is constantly existing. And we take things that constantly exist, it means they always was, they always are, and they always will be. And so these are going to be the beliefs about your life. Now, you can't interact with beliefs about your life unless you have emotionally integrated. So that's the whole issue with what's happening now, which is why a lot of the older teachings are becoming absolutely nonsensical, is because they're removed from what you need in order to integrate something that allows you to recognize what is true. And an emotion can help you recognize something going in or going out. And now, doesn't mean that maybe whatever you're facing with is true about what it is, but it is revealing of something that is true here. And sometimes a little bit of both. And remember, this is the nature of relationships. This is relationships on a divine level. And so I'm looking for love. I'm looking for faith. I'm looking to surrender. I want to let go of control. And I want to understand what that's going to look like for me, because I'm absolutely terrified every time that I let go of control. But what I also found to be interesting is I was there with one of my employees, and he's the one who runs all the sales. And so this has to do with all the money. And with all the money, if I can go ahead and control that, then I can have a certain level of I'm enough, because I have a certain amount of money there. And then that means that I'm this particular kind of thing that can be enough. And it's such a backwards understanding of enough, because we create this am I enough as a question, and we wear that burden on our shoulders, and we take that burden with us into our lives. And I wasn't even aware of any of these things. The only thing I was aware of is that I was borderline obsessive compulsive. I had like a bipolar aggressional flip of breaking out into laughter, followed by incredible anger towards something I couldn't control, as simple as the Wi-Fi, or even as simple as finding the coffee. So there was something interesting about even the coffee and just landing there. Of course, me and my employee are both existing with these journeys at different ends of the spectrum. For him, it's about breaking these beliefs about himself of whether or not he's enough. And for me, well, it's the same thing, about breaking these belief systems about whether or not I'm enough. And so the purpose of this travel was to take myself out of my environment, and my biggest prison was my habits. And there's habits that exist more than just your behaviors. And so I recognize that me having to get my cold brew every morning meant a particular kind of energy that I had that day that could amount to a particular outcome, and that outcome could mean a particular feeling. And if I had that feeling by the end of that day, I was enough. And so it wasn't just a coffee, was it? It was actually a feeling of how I can be enough. And that exists in more areas. And then now we got to go into the hotels, because I promise you it wasn't easy for me to book a hotel unless it was the perfect place, where I can meet the perfect person, and I could have the perfect trip, where I don't lose, where I don't get rejected, where I don't fail, where I don't make mistakes, where I don't spill the coffee. I came up with that one because I spent 2 hours looking for a cold brew place in Paris. And you might go, well, you don't seem like the kind of guy that would do that. Well, you don't know the kind of person you are until you remove yourself from your environment that you've been in your whole life. You want to get to know who you are? Congratulations. Welcome to surrender. You're going to get really familiar. But most people try to move away from things through travel. No, the purpose of travel is to come closer to these things. There's a deep loss. Such a deep loss I was feeling. And it was such a compounded feeling of loss, because it was loss of so much, constant disappointment, a lack of connection, and a search for love that's just not there. As I'm getting older, the people around me are getting older. And there's a sadness to that. And I feel like it's not really spoken about. You know, you can just band-aid it. But the truth is about aging and getting older in your life is that it requires you to look at death. And death has things, death is not that terrifying. What's more terrifying is what echoes through death. And those are the constants of your life. And those things need to be addressed all the time, because when they're addressed, what ends up happening is that you start changing the way that you live your life every day, and that's within your control. And so, you talk about surrender. What you're surrendering to is everything you can't control, and that's everything outside of what you're committed to. And your commitments are in relationship to your actions and your evolution and the kind of person you can become. And it's very, very difficult, because you're recognizing that actually you can be hurt, you can lose control, you can fail, you can get lost, you can spill the coffee. And so 2 hours in Paris, I'm pacing around and I'm looking for the perfect spot, whatever the hell that means. And of course, why is one coffee place better than the other? First, in Europe, cold brews aren't the most popular thing in the world, unless you're going to an American chain in there. And so I'm not even getting the experience of Europe. I'm trying to fucking slap LA into it. So I find this one coffee spot. And of course, whenever I find one coffee spot, you would love it. I'd make an attachment to that coffee spot, and it would be the place that I go to the next day that would give me this feeling. But the thing is I'm not just staying, I'm staying a few days in Paris, and then a few days in Nice, then a few days in Italy, and a few days in Germany, and a few days in Sweden, etc. The trip kind of planned out as it went, and I told myself, if I'm here to surrender, then I'm not here to plan everything. But then it became even more difficult, because I noticed that I had more to lose. And the nature of having more to lose, and then of course, these anxiety attacks, for use of a better word, would happen. I wanted to take everything that I had, and I wanted to be able to give it up to what I valued most, because I recognized that I wasn't free. Although I was making these videos, and I was living my life, and I was coaching my clients, and I was making my money, and I was having what everybody would perceivably be the dream of what a young man could have in his life, I promise you, your life means nothing if you are not connected to the meaning of your life. And there's a particular kind of death that a person likes to bury inside of them that they need to face. And it might be a death that you need to have. And it's like, well, what is going to die? And it's like, well, maybe think about everything that doesn't serve you is going to die. And so what if you could connect to the thing that sets you free? And that means you can live. And it's not because you aren't getting older or you aren't losing things in your life, but it's because that means everything in your life that is valuable to you, you are willing to give up. And you're willing to give it up for something that is true. And it's something that is true is, and it's not that those things aren't, they become your God. And that's not freedom. It's a limitation. And somebody who has an intellect or a sensitivity, and I'd say a sensitivity, can feel these underlying limitations and how deeply it poisons them. And it starts to come out in the things that allow them to feel free. And I think that's an intimate relationship. It's that the relationships of our life are the most important things in them. And the connection that we have in those relationships are confirming of a much deeper truth about eternity. And sometimes, when I talk about, love and trying to control that, well, good luck. Trying to control the feminine, well, good luck. Trying to control the unknown, good luck. Well, I've had a feminine wound. I've spoken about that a lot. I think that's been why I have such a curiosity of the feminine, also such a pull to the feminine, but also so deeply challenged by the feminine and deeply scared of the feminine. I find this one cold brew place, and as meaningless as it might seem to you, is that of course, I get to the cold brew and the cup is not big enough. And I have this like OCD thing where I need to have an infinite amount of ice for my coffee so that it could last a longer time. And look, that's just a preference that I have, but I realized that it was so deeply attached to things. Even the place that I was staying at, I would identify with the environment around me. And so if the only thing that could suck more than wasting 2 hours in the morning to find a coffee thing is that I spill the coffee, and I spilt it on myself, and I was like, I just started to laugh because I realized that this is ridiculous. I have no ability to let go of control, and that's exactly why I'm here to surrender. And so I said, why not? Let's spill it on my shirt again. Just show yourself the message that you're beginning to understand. Well, I'm afraid of failure. I don't want this trip to be a failure. And it's like, whoa, I haven't heard that in a long time. Failure? Be afraid of failing? That doesn't sound like me. Yeah, here I am. Well, I'm interacting with that. I managed to, quickly pick up the environment I was in, kind of accustomed to it. But then, of course, change it again. We're going from Paris to France. From Paris to Nice. Oh, well, in Nice, what do you got to do in Nice? Well, you got to live your James Bond fantasy in Nice, and I'm still holding on to that, by the way, which you're going to really love. because the nature of this trip was to challenge a lot of the beliefs that I had about money and wealth and royalty, and that to be at least the highest level of what wealth can acquire is something that's tremendously human. And the purpose of royalty was not to separate myself from people, because that would just go against everything that I stand for, but to embody what is true in everyone. That is what royalty was there to represent. It was there to represent humanity, not to separate each other from our humanity, but to inspire what is collectively and everyone, and it brings them closer together. It's not a king above his people, it's a king that walks among his people. And really, this is speaking to true leadership with heart. And so, of course, we're going down this train, and I remember I woke up that morning and I was resisting, and I could feel things in my body, in my jaw particularly, in my stomach. Feel that I'm holding on to this control, and I was almost 11 minutes late to that train ride. And, I should probably have a podcast with one of my, the employee that I went with, and we could talk about the trip, kind of get a little more into the nature of the small little details of me losing my shit, because it's funny. I'd lose my shit. They say, you want to fall in love with somebody, travel with them. I disagree. You'll get to know them, and then if you really get to know them, you'll fall in love with them. But not travel in the sense of go on a vacation together. Do that together. See who you are. Don't plan the whole thing. Surrender to the experience. And you might be impressed by how clever you are, but you can't beat this, because you'll know when you're half-assing it. And I noticed that a true failure, and my fear of being a failure, was to half-ass everything I can get from this. And so I had to be willing to give up everything that I had to connect with the intention as to what brought me here. Everything. Take a nap on the train. As I take a nap on the train, I was working out a little too hard earlier that morning. And as I'm trying to control everything, I noticed that my body started to tense up as I was laying down. And as I lay down, I get a Charlie horse that nearly knocks me out. My employee, who is my now friend, grabs me, and he's like, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Get me water, I'm about to pass out." And of course, I have a lecture in 3 hours, which means I need to get off. I need to find a place to go ahead and stay the night for. And every time I had to go find a hotel, it had to be this picture-perfect, materialistic, masturbatory idea of what a journey is, of living like a king. It's like, no, I was a corporate bot who fed a much bigger system, until I recognized the nature of what these things are here to serve is something in you. Remember, by the first week, managed to go from Paris all the way to Nice. Saturday comes along. A list of other challenges, consistent challenges, even challenges with women would come up, a lot of my abandonment issues, but I would reconnect to why exactly I'm here. And I noticed that this was actually something so interesting, is that we're not usually given an opportunity to interact with life enough, because we're given the best excuse to turn away from it, because it's just every day. The days we turn to are the days that we have to, vacation for. And the life that we have on every day is something we turn away from. And so we feel most like ourselves when we're willing to let all of that go. Yet to embody that in your life requires such a deep faith. And it's like, well, it's a deep faith that everything is already worked out. And believe me, that's pretty hard to exist with, because when everything is okay and you feel this state of peace, you're left with the present. And that seems to be true. How things are going to turn out today, I don't know. Yet I have a burning curiosity. Excuse me. Every day was a lesson. Every day was a challenge of these beliefs. To spend that kind of money, which is something I never did. And I believe a recognition of the initial intention of why am I here on this trip? Well, I want to find love. That's why. There's a few girls that I knew out there, and I wanted to go investigate of whether or not there was a connection there. And of course, no shocker, no. And, well, not in that current place that I was in, because I lacked an awareness of something that I deeply needed. I needed this. And it's like, whatever this I needed, it's like, I struggled with the feminine for so long, and the unknown is deeply feminine, chaotic. The waters, emotions, feminine, chaotic. Chaotic doesn't mean good or bad. A chaotic force is necessary for creativity. And able to harness that creativity is not through the control of that chaos. It's through the ability to create structures for it. So you don't control it. You learn to harness it. It's the snake that wraps around the left arm. It is not something that you remove from reality. It's something, and you also don't become bigger than it in that sense. You become bigger in it in the sense that you understand its function. And you don't want to diminish that. It's like, my God, I've been hurt by that before. Of course I've been hurt by that. But what if the intention is to let go, to fail, to lose control, to get rejected, to spill the coffee? That was kind of like my mantra. Maybe I'm here to miss the flight, miss the train, book the poor hotel, lose the money. Oh, I've never done a video like this before. It's long. Oh, it's important. It's really important. This one's fun. So I'm going to go ahead and live my James Bond fantasy. They drop off the car. They tell me it's a 20,000 euro deposit, which is insane. And I was like, that's cool. Let's run it. And well, that wasn't a good idea. Well, because I had to call my bank and I told them to lift off all spending limits, which will come later, come in handy later. And I'm there with my friend, my employee, and he's like, look, you really don't need to do that. We're having a great time. And I was like, no, we're going to go ahead and go through with the car. Of course, the car didn't go through. And I was there trying to impress this one girl with this car, and whatever. I had to settle for a Mini Cooper, God forbid, which was a much better car, in my opinion. I had a lot more fun. Yet, even that was its own existential conversation. I then go to the Negresco Hotel in Nice, a really beautiful place. And I spend one night there, and we're breaking through a lot of beliefs that we have around money. And by the way, you'll never know any of the beliefs you have around money unless you spend your money. And there's a difference between gambling and learning to develop faith with something. And I would say the difference is the intention of something that is, the intention to face something that is constant in your life. It's not a dice roll that removes you from it. It is something that incorporates you into it and maybe potentially challenges you beyond what you're comfortable. So I said, all right, I think we're done with France. Time to road trip to Portofino. Get on a call. By the way, I wasn't booking any of my hotels in advance. I was doing all of these things intuitively. I wanted to see where I wanted to go, what it was. And I noticed the intuition only existed in the unknown because the rest of it is simulated. It's artificial. That what's really there is the intuition is you removed from all of your prior information. It is something that remains to be true, that is the strength of what you can understand truly and know about somebody. And intuition is strong, and intuition runs deep. They tell me the Splendido Hotel, Portofino. And I asked them how much for, was it 4 nights? 1 at the Mare, 3 at the Belmont. They said total for the Belmont, $4,600, and for the Mare, $1,500. Sounds pretty good to me. I can do that. And he goes, sure, sir. Are you sure? And I go, yeah, sounds good. Let's do it. And I get in the car. We drive all the way to Portofino. Beautiful trip. I'm recognizing that I'm learning a little bit more and more about surrender. I'm not, giving a shit too much about my coffees. I'm actually learning to experience myself. Well, you don't get an opportunity to do that unless you don't do something like as crazy as this. So I know that we're going to stay in Portofino. I have my wonderful lecture, and I go to check the account, see if they remove the deposit. The next morning, I look at my phone and I see minus $15,000, Splendino Belmont Hotel. And I'm like, oh shit. Flight or flight, panic, scarcity, go home, eject, return back to sender, go back the trail you followed. And, well, I was bypassing a lot of the fact that I was too prideful to admit that I made a mistake and I could talk to the concierge and tell them to do it. So instead I made this about abundance, which is really funny because, you can fool yourself. I end up looking at the email and I noticed it was $4,600 a night. That the person on the phone told me it was $4,600 total. No, it was $4,600 a night. 4,600 euros, so that's more than 4,600 euros is about $5,000 a night. Now, I thought about it. I was like, okay, well, talk about royalty. My understanding of royalty before was very, very different than this. I guess my mistakes, a surrender to the unknown, allowed me to understand what existed outside of that. And yes, that is true. It did. That you cannot discover something about you that you aren't willing to stumble upon. So there needs to be a particular kind of surrender to the unknown to discover what you don't know about you. And you have to be able to recognize that maybe the best dance move was not the one you've seen in someone, but it was the one that you were able to find when you got lost in yourself. Whatever that is, you can surrender to. And for me, I recognize that about dance, is that the things that usually click are the ones that you were able to go, hey, this will feel right. And maybe even then, it's actually a little misstep. And that misstep showed a much bigger, like, whoa, we like that. And that new misstep becomes a new big thing. And it's like, well, why? And we'll get into that a little bit later. Yet I was able to realize, like, oh my God, well, that's a different understanding. And this is challenging me far beyond what I had initially. Because what I had initially was a really clever, elaborate plan of what royalty was based off of my own understanding of it when I had nothing to work with. So I was working within the bubble of my understanding of it, and I was aiming up at the rim. And maybe the rim was enough to aim for, but I noticed that if I wasn't willing to surrender to the other variables that were there to potentially go with that, then there wouldn't be a mistake. And so maybe spilling the coffee was the best thing that ever happened because it exposed me to something more. And yet it exposed me to something more. It also exposed me to my character deficiencies in relationship to it. So sure, break your wealth beliefs. Break your beliefs about what you're willing to create in your life. Let's talk about the things that really hold you back. Things that are constants. And of course, you'd love it. The hotel is a James Bond fantasy. And the second I get to the hotel, they're playing the James Bond soundtracks, Moonrakers, Diamonds Are Forever, and Spy Who Loved Me. Now, I love all of those songs. I'm a huge James Bond fan. I love everything James Bond. Yet, to have an identity that is James Bond is very, very problematic. There's a playfulness I like about it, and there's an adventure I like about it. But the pseudo-identity, the Prince Philip running from responsibility into a delusion, is the removal from the discomfort of life and the negative emotions that come with it, and potentially the ability to experience what you seek through them, is very controversial. So, I'm at this beautiful palace. I couldn't believe it when I got there. I didn't tell the concierge I made a mistake. Hell no, I wouldn't do that. I don't want to be seen as a cheap, broke Jew. And that would be the worst thing that could ever happen to me. Yet I noticed that there was still, every morning I woke up was a complete and total visceral panic attack. What am I doing? Why am I here? What is this about? This is foolish. What's wrong with you? Underlying shame. Even to do something like that is so shameful, and it's bad. What you're doing is bad. And I was like, okay, well, this is actually really powerful that I'm doing this, because maybe this isn't a vacation. There were elements of it that were, but no, this was reality, and that's miraculous. And that to me seems to me what we are seeking wonders for. By the third night of my stay in the Belmont, which is the super Bond complex, I had a call with my coach. This was the first one that I had on that trip. Thank God I did, because my head was up my ass. I was feeling really exhausted. And that's usually a sign that you're resisting something. There's something to be, tired. Tired is powerful. Exhausted. There's something else underlying there. Something you're extending yourself beyond. Something you're looking to control. For a little bit, I was living my James Bond fantasy, but I was ultimately ending the trip early, because spending that amount of money was cut my trip down in half. And it was like, well, how am I going to do this? Money coming in, haven't really seen much of that. And now I'm starting to try to work through these feelings of inadequacy through my employee. And maybe if I can get him to get the right mindset, then I don't need to worry about these things. And that's even more clever in its own way. The third night that I'm there, we met a few girls. He tells me, hey, you made a decision like that. You are going to go down to the concierge, the receptionist, the hotel manager, and you're going to ask for your money back. You have a pride issue. And I was like, I was just talking about all these things of wealth and what they really represented, this whole royalty thing. And I came from, from getting your hand slapped when you reach the light switch, watching the movie in the closet because there wasn't enough space in the room for a TV that was this big. Watching what happens to people when they experience poverty is it brings the worst out in those people. And that's a disease. And it changes people's behaviors with what they value, and they continue to negotiate with that. And so that's my life. I guess you could say it was my overcorrection. It's also what I was afraid, and I felt that I needed to prove something to myself, like I was enough through these decisions. And so for him to tell me, your pride, it will be the only thing that'll make you broke. And says, go downstairs and ask the concierge for that. That's going to be your coaching. And so I go downstairs. I see that I'm dripping sweat. This was probably the most difficult thing that I ever did. Because it wasn't like I'm asking this on the first day. Hey, there seems to be a mistake. This is what happened. I don't have that kind of money to be spending here. Look, I'd like to get a room if it's not something like that. Look, all those things are very reasonable. No, but instead I had this pride. I had to protect myself from being this thing, from going back to being there again, to whatever that is. And of course, the overcorrection of poverty is materialism, and it's just as much of a disease. And it's when people are willing to put things like that above what is most valuable in their life that gives them meaning and connects them to their path. And now you don't want to negotiate with your path, because then your life becomes a nihilistic fantasy where even the person you married was the wrong choice. Don't do it. Don't recommend it. Let's go ahead and find the real journey of life, because that's going to be the only thing that allows you to have comfort in the existential, when it comes to the existential questions. And I know everything about today is really, we're just going to kind of stick to surrender, healing wounds of love and its divine depths. I go down to the night manager and I tell him, hey, this is super embarrassing. Actually, this is killing me to even ask you this, because what I'm really asking is for help. And that's, healing in that feminine wound in general is being able to ask for support. And a lot of men can't do that, especially when they're not connected to the feminine. They need to be willing to ask for support. And that's a very difficult thing to do. It takes a lot of courage to be on the other side of an extended hand. And maybe it takes a lot of diminishing your pride in order to be able to do that. And I noticed that the danger of this identity I had was deeply prideful. And I go down to the night manager. There's a guy to the right of me, and he has this this Bitcoin investor, the last person you'd want to be telling you're broke next to. And I talked to the hotel manager. I'm like, hey, can we speak outside? He goes, yeah. And I go, look, I made a really big mistake. I've been trying to reinforce this thing to myself through these decisions. And, you probably don't need to hear that from me, but ultimately I'm asking for your help because I was told it was 4,600 euros for 3 nights and I agreed to 15,000 euros. And, if you can help me out. And he goes, I really thank you for telling me this. I really wish I could help you out, but I'm the night manager. You're going to have to tell the morning manager. Oh boy, even worse. And then the girls are coming up with my employee. We're going to go meet up with these girls, and I need to go ahead and tell this girl that I made all of these choices. What's really funny is the girl ended up falling in love with me more or less because I was telling her how ridiculous I was trying to just, I was trying to prove something to me. And there's this pride that I had. And I told her the story of, going up to the concierge guy and just falling and impaling myself on the sword. It's like James Bond is dying for once. Earlier that day, I was also trying to reinforce this way of thinking of, hey, you know what? Let's find the other most expensive hotel and let's buy that. And so I did. I did 2 nights at the Four Seasons for 3,800 euros a night. And I'm still at this point, I'm trying to tell myself that I'm surrendering to something, but I'm really not. What I'm doing is I'm walking the same circle that I've been walking, that I've only been able to see when I removed myself from my environment. And it's been something that's been affecting my business, my ability to grow it, because it's removed my ability to go where I need to go. I have been one eye blind, my right eye blinded to the direction of my life and where I want to take it, because I have to reinforce this identity of how I need to be seen. And it's like, here's how you become broke. Very simple. You come from poverty. You make money. Now, once you make money, you have to consistently making money to avoid that, because this is as much of the thing that it's a reaction. And okay, well then how can I integrate that reaction? Well, if I'm here, I need to be able to not be afraid to face whatever that is, to recognize what I'm trying to prove to myself that I ran from. So of course I did that the other day. I didn't think about it. It was a beautiful night that we shared, and we continued on with our journey. The next place we're going to be going from here is to Florence. And while in Florence, there's the hotel, the Four Seasons. And I give my coach a call and I tell him, hey, I don't know if I told you this, but I booked another expensive hotel. And he goes, how much? He goes, 3,800 euros a night. And he goes, ask for your money back. Third time after the morning, I spoke to the lead manager, and they actually did help me out. They covered everything else that wasn't the 3 nights. They actually looked over the recording. They're like, that's a mistake on their part, but you stayed here for that number, so there's nothing we can do. Totally get it. Wasn't about the money. What was it about? Oh, it was about my feelings in relationship to the decisions I made, and potentially maybe I'm trying to prove something to myself that I'm enough. Then we go to Florence. I go to the Four Seasons. I'm too prideful to admit that, maybe I made the wrong choice. This is not what I want to do. There were small little details, like when I checked in, they told me the room that I had a stain on the rug. And that stain on the rug was, enough for me to go, hey, it's fine, I'd like my money back, go check out another hotel. But I didn't. I had to act like I was interested in another room. I didn't want to be seen as that, that cheap Jew, using that as an identity. And I'm sweating. This is like, I cut the blue wire, cut the red goes boom, blue goes what again, and I'm sweating throughout the whole process of it, and I'm reinforcing to my employee to help me out here because I want to really break through whatever this is that I'm trying to prove to myself. I would have been more okay blowing the money than I would have been breaking my pride, and that was to me very interesting, that was more comfortable to me to walk away from that, to diminish the things that I had surrounding them so that I could be seen a certain way. I get off the hook. He goes, yep, you can have your money back. Totally understand. And I was very vulnerable with him. I told him the story. I said, I'm trying to prove something to myself. I'm really embarrassed to admit it. I feel quite ashamed. Yet ultimately, I'm trying to spend money I don't have. And it's too expensive. And that was hard for me to hear, because a lot of the stuff that I've done around abundance, and anybody who's worked with me in the past probably knows this one, is that I've learned to get out of that place. But there's still another place that you get into. It's the overcorrection. It's the reaction. 15 minutes before Shabbat, and I don't go on my phone on my day of rest, tackling also a lot of my religious beliefs, which I also found to be beautiful, because when I'm no longer in the house, I'm no longer having these existential, theological, protective conversations. I realized I never even cared about it. What I was caring about was this thing, this driving force, this guiding force, this work that I'm doing here. I break the curse. And of course, by breaking the curse, I'm guided to this beautiful place. It's a monastery, an awesome hotel, a beautiful room. And, oh my God, 1/6 the price. And I had a great time. Nothing to prove. I felt like now I can actually go where my heart is, because I'm not trying to prove something to me. One level of liberation. Florence, Rome, and this is where it hit. I think one of the deepest things that hit there was that all of the deposits were still being held. A lot of things were still up in the air. We're supposed to sell a couple deals. All those deals don't go through. I can pay attention to the signs. I booked another soulless 5-star hotel to prove something to myself in that moment. And it's something that's clearly reactionary. As in, it's not something that I choose. It's something that I'm afraid to be in that place again. Well, what is that place that I'm so afraid of? And it's I don't want to not be enough. Recorded an 18-minute voice note of everything that I was going through. I hit the gym. I never seen that little money in my account. And I never felt so inadequate in my whole life. I couldn't break past this thing. I was stuck here. I'm always going to be brought back here. And why? Well, your beliefs are broken at the bottom. My employee, who started off at a shed in a wall, upgraded to the end of the trip to go into a 5-star hotel because he realized the nature of money is not something that you have to hold on to. It's what you're willing to give up to connect to this underlying state of value. This connection to, are you enough? And potentially, you have to be willing to give up everything that you've put above you as what you use as a way to allow yourself to feel enough. And sometimes that creates these like pseudo stories, these fake directions, and these meaningless lives. So that maybe potentially, if you had to connect with what was truly true and to give up everything that you've made valuable, then you could connect to what truly is valuable to you. And the investigation of that creates a connection to purpose. If there's a dissolution of identity in relationship to it, which is who am I? You lose your motive, you lose your direction, you feel aimless, you feel inadequate. It's week 2. And I have a real conversation with him about the nature of what am I pursuing in my life? What am I trying to prove? The last 3 years I've been struggling to get above this particular number because if I don't have the numbers to show for it, then what am I? Am I enough? And by the way, this was also playing out into all the other things in my life, which was, if am I enough unless I meet the partner? And it's like, well, if am I enough until I get that kind of love, and I have to get that through somebody. And so I have to, juggle all of these things around, why is it I'm so afraid to surrender? Why is it I'm so afraid to let go of control? And I tell him in the midst of this inadequacy, look, I haven't had this little money in my account since I was 16. And I feel this burden on my shoulders, this burden like I'm not enough. And he starts talking to me in his like rational mind. And I said, dude, fuck your ideas. Tell me something that you actually believe for once. Because when you're actually in this position to where potentially, and I could show you a little bit about why you actually even pose this question of I'm not enough, is because if you are enough now, then you are left with a visceral terror of what the fuck am I pursuing? What am I doing? Maybe everything that I've been pursuing my whole life is false. If I'm enough now, and this is how it presented to me at first, then why would I need to be enough for that? Well, it felt like letting it go. And that night, well, that was the first of one of the many breakthroughs. Well, if I'm enough now, then of course I'm enough for that. Yet it felt like having to give it up, which is so interesting about the sacrifice of Isaac, the Abrahamic story of being able to give that up for what is initially true. In a lot of ways, it feels like having to kill the thing you love. And it's like, well, on the contrary, it's to be set free to experience the thing you love most, just not as your God. That burden of not being enough is something I've taken with me my whole life, and I was able to burn away everything that wasn't me until I get to the point to where maybe I'm crawling. But what I'm crawling on is closer to the ground of who I am, the foundation of everything that's there, and I could somehow get my hands on it. And I've fallen from such a great height, but I'm so close to myself, closer than I've ever been. I felt enough and I felt free. I had nothing to prove. And it was hard for me to maybe give it up. And then I realized if I'm enough now, of course I'm enough for that. And it broke all those beliefs. And the next day, all of the deposits come off and all the money comes in and the deals start to close. The miraculous nature of life. Yet, how I'm utilizing my time. Most people would call it as productive, but it's not just getting things done like sorting spreadsheets. It's showing up to that resistance of your life. It's more than just, this list of accomplishments to create a feeling. It's the letting go of things in order to connect to truth. And to have something to let go of initially means that you've worked for something. Yet it's almost like you go through this whole dysfunction of like, I'll be enough one day if I can get this thing or be this person or have this money or make that number. And then you're given a point to be able to embrace yourself as you are and let that all go. All the effort, all the energy, that weight that you hold on to, this comfortable narrative that most people would rather accept, which is, I would rather be somebody who is crawling at a rate of 0.3 centimeters a day towards the thing that I love, that I can guarantee a result for, than to accept that I am enough for that unconditional thing. And have no control over that. And so it made me understand that the nature of control and what you think you can control is what's removing you from your... It's like, okay, yeah, what we understand as control is what makes us feel powerful. And it's like, you don't want to play that game, because if you ask a cuck, and this sounds interesting, if they feel powerful in relationship to the dynamic that they've agreed to, the answer is yes. They feel like they're in control. And it's like, well, what are they in control of? And it's like, well, it's this feeling of them being enough, or even the confirmation of them not being enough. And that gives them enough feeling of power. And so this idea that we have of control is absolutely absurd. Maybe it's everything that you're comfortable with that removes you from a truth about life that you can be connected to that you're not in control of. It's kind of like a relationship with a woman you love. An integration of the feminine. Might be more I've ever spoken into front of a face-to-face camera. And yeah, it takes a lot. Oh, it takes a lot. Especially when you're sick. Don't even try. I'm going to integrate some of the later stories into another lecture I have. Yet I wanted to make this about being able to investigate the depth you need to be willing to go in order to find love. My employee finds the click, I find the click. We recognized, he says it's time for him to go home. 2 weeks later. Wouldn't really call it a vacation. That's like an integrative vacation. You know, it's intentional. They're there to serve a function, to get you closer to yourself, to make your daily life more full of play, connection, inspiration, emotion, depth. To take everything and bring it into your day-to-day, to not make that your day-to-day, and to recognize the nature of that truth that exists constantly. To accept that I was enough. And what that changed in me is that I was no longer being pulled to the inauthentic directions. And if I was willing to let go of the pseudo-directions I created, then maybe I can be guided by something. Maybe I could be spoken to. There is an authentic emotion, an authentic intuition that is taking me somewhere. And that authentic intuition said, go to Germany. Well, what would I do in Germany? What's my intention? Find love. Okay. Now, this is where I wanted to slow down a little bit. I think the nature of what I was experiencing the whole trip is absolute visceral terror all the time with something that I'm connecting with that exists on a divine level, because I'm looking for love. And when we talk about something about the nature of love, we're talking about something that's deeply feminine. And also being able to surrender to something is, I think that the love thing is universal. It's masculine and feminine. Yeah. The feminine aspect of it is the surrender to that. It's almost like you're exposing yourself to it. And it's like you would never be able to really find it unless you'd be willing to go for yourself alone. Because there's a comfort of this external pursuit. But I promise you, there's an existential anxiety that comes with the infinite external pursuit of the thing you're looking for. And I'll tell you what it is. A, you reinforce a lie about the nature of what brings people together. And you start noticing the miraculous nature of life that exists on a day-to-day. You also begin to recognize that, like, you did nothing to find the people that you really connected with. You attracted the people that you really connected with because of this underlying understanding you had of yourself. And it's like, then those people you can develop intimate relationships with, and they could further along the process of your internal connection with what is intrinsically true. So, Munich, didn't even know it was a festival, Oktoberfest festival. It's a festival of love. The king and queen issued an anniversary. They've been celebrating it for the last 300 years. And, oh boy, it was tough for me to be alone. I sought comfort in a FaceTime with a friend, a call from anybody. Even a call from my mother. And I say that with full transparency because it was really difficult for me to be alone with myself. I felt really lonely, and I felt like that was bad. And I felt sad, and I felt that that was bad. I felt desperate, and I felt that that was bad. Felt scared, felt that was bad. So that really removed me from myself for the beginning of that trip. And even in the midst of that crowd, I just realized that I was running and searching for something. And this was a beautiful point. It was the second night that I was there. I noticed that I was scanning and looking and trying to chase or try to create or artificially bring something to it. And I recognized, well, what is it I am? It's like, I'm afraid. And I'm so scared that I'm running. So I said, okay, in the middle of the crowd, stand still. Don't move. Completely alone. Show where you are for you. Show up what you need. So I stood there in the crowd for about 30 minutes because I was realizing that my heart was beating out of my chest. And I have a performance where I can make it look like I'm having the pseudo dream of the century of, talk to this girl, talk to that guy, what an adventure, but that's not why I was here. I was here to find love. I recognize you don't find love in that place. No, that's abandonment. You find how to find yourself where you left you, alone. And if you're alone, maybe you can find love. I haven't been alone like that in my life, not so far away from home. I had nobody to even lean on or whatever it was, and I recognized that there were things that I had to let go of, to surrender to. And even in that state, I found it interesting that a few people came up to me and were like, hey, come on these roller coasters with us. And we had a little Europe trip adventure. I'm sure you've heard of them before. It's the magic of reality that constantly surrounds us. The thing that pulls other people closer to us. Well, it's coming time. Time to go to the Black Forest, the thing that brought me here to this trip, that made me go out for myself to begin with. There's been so many lessons and so much growth, such a short amount of time, yet we're not done yet. And I promise you this will be the most important lesson. I recognize that our wounds of trauma, yes, they point the direction of your life. And you might not like it, but think of it this way, that it's going to require you to go so deep within yourself that the thing that you were seeking you discover within you. And when that happens, you have taken something to a divine level. Because, it's almost like it pointed you somewhere. And you have a confused need with a desire. And that's dangerous because, when you have these needs, it's almost has nothing to do with the other person. They don't understand that. They didn't raise you. They didn't give you those wounds. But those needs are really you need to take that deeper within you because you need this. You need this intimacy. So I rent my car. It's Friday. Shabbat's about to be, and that's the no phone zone for me. And I start driving into the forest. Or 4 hours till I get there. It's near Friesberg in Germany. The Black Forest at this time of the year is incredibly empty. You want to come there during the summer because it's warmer. Right now it's cold. And so it's returned to its population of, depends what city you're at. I wanted to go to a very small city because I didn't want to be distracted. I knew what I came there for was to find love. Now that was interesting because also a part of me was thinking, well, what's a population where I could potentially meet somebody who's also soul searching? That'd be kind of cool. And I had this little fantasy map in my head. And the best way to describe it is if you've seen the Simpsons movie. There's a scene in the movie where they're leaving to Alaska because they're felons for the crimes that they've committed. And they've destroyed Springfield. And Marge is like, Homer, you don't know where you're going. And he goes, well, that's not a problem. And he takes the map and he puts it right there. He goes, look, we're there. And he drives off a cliff, and then the map rolls off, and yeah, he was there. And so there's this external journey to connect to something internally. And that's where the real connections are made, because the rest of this is an opportunity for you to seek that out. To show what you're willing to look for is sometimes something you can go out to. But if you go out to something without internally understanding what this is bringing you closer to, this meaning of life, and the necessity for that meaning, and the implications of meaning being a purpose, because then there's something to speak to you individually. And then that's so beautiful to understand that, that's the product of the love of creation. that it's given you a choice to show up for that path. You can choose that. We start thinking about the greatest gift that life is, and you can feel the greatest gift that life is, and you don't need to have your gratitude journal anymore. You can embody it. There was the adventure of life. I could feel it. I was getting closer. My coach I was on the phone with, he told me, he's like, this is going to be deeply metaphorical, going into the Black Forest. And we think about something like the feminine forces, the ocean, the forest, these jungles. And it's like, well, that was something I was called to. I was called to go here. This was the intuition. And it seems kind of odd, because why would you want to go there? You know, I tell that to people. They're like, why do you want to go to Germany? Like, you're traveling? It's like, what are you going to do there? It's like, great question. I don't know. I'm curious about what brought me there. So as I start, now at this point, I'm breaking into the forest, and I could see I'm 15 minutes before Shabbat, and I haven't booked a hotel. And I got really good at doing this and recognizing what was there for me. I was okay with making the wrong places. And I find this one place in Shiltach, which is a population of 400, and the average age is 85. So, you know, your likelihood of you meeting your wife there as a young man is very, 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 very low, but not impossible. Boom, little plaque, little fantasy, little wallpaper, covering a massive hole that I don't want to face, that terrifies me deeply. Check in, get 3 nights at this one place, the last room there, and everything else was booked up. I sign out, close my phone. I'm alone now. I get a little dinner, and I'm still playing into this thing of why I'm here. What am I looking for? The next morning I wake up, I grab breakfast. It's 12 o'clock. I said, you know what? I want to go walk into the woods, just for a little walk. It's my Shabbat. You know, I wouldn't take it too serious. It's my day of rest. That's for Sunday, of course. I start my hike, and I ask myself a question, and I notice that the nature of me being here alone was deeply intimate. I was left with myself. There wasn't another soul in sight. This was a walk into a forest, or at least what was a trail, and there was nobody. When you wake up in the morning, there was one cafe that was open, and it had about 4 or 5 people there. And those 4 or 5 people were much older, and you're looking for this thing called connection and love. And I promise you, it feels like the doors are getting real close. There was an ominous feeling to the forest. There's an ominous feeling to this journey. There was a terrifying feeling that I was having being alone. I couldn't quite place it, but I felt it subconsciously. And as I'm walking up, I'm having these old childhood memories come up. I'm in a suit, because that's how I dress on Shabbat. Probably not the greatest for hiking, but, you know, you might meet your wife. No, that was part of my fantasy, but that was not the reason why I was wearing the suit. I was wearing the suit because I wasn't planning on doing this. That was the whole thing, is that maybe I was never planning on it, but we always had the opportunity to interact with the thing that we're looking for the whole time. Could be found today. Could be found today. It's a question of what you're willing to do, or maybe the small little list of things that you're willing to face until you could face much bigger things. I don't think I would have been able to face this. And there's a reason why I'm sharing with you the last 50 minutes of everything that happened, because there is no damn way in hell you would believe what I'm going to tell you right now unless every single little bit of that was able to help me address what was on my heart that I was carrying with me my whole life. Before I take a step up the trail, I ask myself, why am I here in Germany? Like, find love? So many echoes of my old relationships were coming up. My relationship with myself, this walk with my inner child. And I thought, well, I can't control whether or not I meet somebody, find love there. But I can control finding love with myself, for myself. Grab some water. Woo! Now I'm putting myself back in the shoes. So I'm stepping up these trails, and I'm noticing that I'm getting further and further away from the town Shiltach. I can kind of see it as a little spaz. It's like a very, very, very distant town. Almost like something you could walk to maybe in an hour. The nature of these hills, but I'm noticing that the forest is right next to me and it's kind of staring at me. There's an ominous feeling. I could see the woods lined up. And to describe you the woods and what it looks like is that the trees are a dark green and the leaves are almost black. And the moss that covers the floor is a bright green. And so you have a bright green followed by a dark green followed by an almost black. And in between that, there's kind of like ups and downs and hills. And so there's this green, this light green lighting it up, but there's something almost like the darkness of the trees is, in its own way, the inspiration to the Brothers Grimm's, which is what it was for. It served a function to tell some of the greatest stories. And for me, it was always those stories that spoke to me as a kid. And it was like, well, what is something about this forest? And I was like, through all of these stories, this is where the, Sleeping Beauty, Cinderella, Beauty and the Beast. What other ones do we have that are also inspired by the Brothers Grimm's? Snow White. I think even some of the Sleepy Hollow stories. And, there's an ominous feeling, deep ominous feeling. And I see this trail on the right. And I'm remembering my thing. I'm like, here, I did this. All right, cool. I can get back to the town from there. I don't need to walk too far in, just enough. And then I see what is clearly not a path. And it's almost like it's leading into this dark forest. And I said, okay, here it goes. It was so terrifying to just take one step in that direction because I knew what that meant. And there were these higher grasses, and the grasses would get high. Maybe that means snakes. And I'm all alone. I don't even know if there's anybody here. You could shout and yell. No one's there, man. It's Saturday. Fucking people don't exist. There wasn't a single person I met on the trail. There was one, but it was like on the first 200 feet up. And as I'm walking in, I just noticed that there was so much fear just in stepping into the forest where there was no trail. And I think that's also metaphorical for how deeply are you willing to surrender to the thing that most terrifies you? And I think that's exactly the nature of how courageous you have to be. And so I've always remained, kind of trapped in this bubble my whole life because I like to bypass fear. I never like to accept that fear means that I can be courageous. I like to think of this idea that I was never afraid and I don't have to show that to anybody and I could achieve that all at 25. And it was nothing but absurd because it's not true. It's like courage requires a vulnerability of a deep terror in the face of that. And it's like the thing that allows us to go deeper into this dark woods metaphorically is that there's a deeper inclination for something that makes your life more meaningful, that is so damn worth it. That's why we walk into the hearts of the wood. And I just knew that I could just take enough one step after the next. Just look at my feet, just another step, just another step. And then I'm in the woods. That trail looks faint, surrounded by these trees and this bright green moss. And then I smelled, I was like, all right, I know how to get back. Just remember those words. As I continued to walk into the woods, I noticed that my direction backwards was becoming really faint. And every step I take forward became more and more terrifying. And it was like, oh, man. I was like, okay, whatever, keep going, Tried whistling, thinking about meeting a beautiful forest nymph and having the connection of the universe. And I was already aware that was a fantasy. I was reading over my journal out loud in the woods, like it was some sort of thing I was trying to prove to myself that I wasn't scared or terrified. And I said, oh my God, why am I so afraid of being lost? I'm so terrified of being lost. It was like bears, wolves, snakes. No. If I'm lost, I'm alone. And I shook my head at a steady pace and was like, put the book away. I recognized the fantasy was a way for me to remove myself from what I was experiencing. I said, okay. I'm willing to get lost. I'm willing to fail. I'm willing to lose. I'm willing to get rejected. I'm willing to spill the coffee. I was afraid of being lost because I'd be alone. And I got lost. I walked for about another hour and I didn't know the way back. I was kind of had an idea of direction, but that was not something I can trust. But I can kind of trust the path that I'm on right now, that if I can continue with this, what I'm really afraid of is being alone. And I dropped to my knees and I began to cry. And it was a cry of what was coming up for me was, I'll never be loved. I'll never meet someone. If I never meet someone, I'll never be loved. There will be no meaning in my life. I'll be trapped. If I'm alone with me, I'm trapped. If I'm alone, there is no adventure. And I continued to walk into the feeling. And it was just, by the way, just on a surface level, it was what was really terrifying me on a constant level. I was taking with me everywhere I was going into my life. I was so deeply afraid of being alone and I'll never be loved. And that just kept coming up. I'll never be loved. There's no meaning if I can't share it with somebody. What about a family? And I was crying as I was walking. I realized being lost was not as terrifying as being alone. And now I'm alone. And I'm a little less terrified. And I continue to walk. And I walk through. I pierce through a series of these woods. And I stumble upon a small town. The small town points me back in the direction. Back home. Sun setting. It's almost been 7 hours. And then I have to walk back before the sun completely closes and I have to take the streets. I was afraid of being lost because I'd be alone. And that was just the beginning. I felt myself manage to find my way home, but I felt like I could feel the eyes of the forest looking at me. Bright red eyes. It was staring at me. What it represented was, we're not done. You might have walked through me. You might have made it out, but you haven't really made it out. Because I could feel it staring at my tail. It was looking at my butt. I could feel its gaze. And it was picking up. It was like something was behind me. Something much bigger. It was so much bigger. It was a cosmic dread. It was a great, great darkness. And it was growing, and it was growing, and it was growing. And I could feel that it was far, far more powerful than me in any way that I could ever understand. That it was so much bigger, and it was something that was getting closer and closer. A tsunami of nothingness behind me. And I grab my phone from upstairs. Shabbat's coming to an end. I grab my journal, take it downstairs to the cafe. And as I'm downstairs at the cafe, I'm kind of shaking my foot. I wrote down a few of those things, and the things that I wrote down were enough for me to recognize that if I am alone, and I was always alone, and that's all there was, all there is, and all there will be, then, of course, I'm enough. Because that's all there is. It's more than enough. The greatest, we won't even get to that. Actually, I'll explain to you more of that terror. I still feel the forest staring at me. Staring at my butt. Getting larger and larger, and I feel like when I feel it here in this place, I could really describe it. And it was like I knew that I was not done. I was not done. That was the first time I was truly willing to get lost, to lose it all, and I found myself more found, and I recognized that I wasn't as afraid, that I could face being alone again, but it wasn't done with me. It was a much bigger monster, and it had a lot more talking to do, and it had a lot more showing to do about me. It was clearly a force, a divine force, that I was not familiar with, and it was one that I've never allowed myself to surrender to, and potentially my experiences in my life have limited my understanding of this thing's existence on a divine level. I go upstairs, and go upstairs, and it's 9 o'clock. I looked at my work stuff. I gave my employee a call. Told him a little bit about I got lost in the forest. Look at me. And I knew I didn't face it. I didn't face it internally. Like an episode of The Twilight Zone, this darkness is getting larger and larger. It almost feels like the light in my room is getting dimmer and dimmer. And I look outside the window, and my heartbeat starts to beat faster, faster, faster. A state of panic is kicking in. Because this fear, this forest is still staring at me. But it's staring at me, and it's much more than what the forest represents. It's just a reflection of that faint kind of cosmic dread of what I'm going to experience. And I look out the window of the town, and I don't think you'll believe me when I say this, but around 9 o'clock sharp, It was like I saw people scattered like cockroaches into their home, close the doors, turn the lights off. The streets were empty. I was alone. There was nobody around. And I started to freak out, and I get on my phone and I start dialing. I'm just trying to call people. Where's the nearest town? I gotta get out of here. And I'm still looking at the window, and I notice that the electricity in the house shuts off. And as I'm there, I'm left with this one light on, my pen, my paper, and this fear is coming over. It's starting to choke me. It's getting stronger. And I can't even, I'm looking for the nearest town. It's an hour and 10 minutes away. Well, I can get to my car. I can go to that town, then I can go to Munich. And it was like I was seeing monster of monsters before my eyes. It was the darkness that I was afraid of. I'm sat in my chair, heart beating. And I was thinking like, oh my God, I'm going to lose my mind. I'm going to lose my mind. I'm going to lose my mind. I can't do this. I can't be here. I can't be here another day. I can't be here another day. And then the intention, deeper intention. I was like, why am I here? What brought me to the Black Forest? Well, this did. And at that moment, I was able to realize I could experience this. I could channel this. And it felt like an axe to my skull. It was like my consciousness split open this way, that there was something coming in me. And it was just visceral terror. It's about like 1,000% of more fear than I've ever experienced in my life. It put the forest to shame because it made me realize what I was internally through getting lost in the forest, and maybe I was trying to avoid all of those feelings of what it really was, but now it's coming back for me. Quiet town completely closes off. All the doors close. And as I'm there sitting down with my pen and paper, I realized I was looking for the nearest flight out, and all the flights were ridiculous. Couldn't even afford some of them. They were so expensive. And I said, okay, I got to surrender to this. I can do this. And I get on the pen and paper. And I've never written like this in my whole life. I've never described such a greater fear. And it was like I couldn't escape this. I felt trapped. Every door was closing. Even the doors in my soul were closing, and they were locking me in. There was nothing I could see outside of my eyes other than this image. And I'm writing down, and there's a story of this boy. And it was like, once upon a time, there was a boy who was all alone. There was nothingness that was surrounding him. He didn't know what he looked like or where he was from or what his name was. And in the heart of that boy, there was a dream. And then there was a light in that dream. And in that dream, there was a king and a queen, and they were in love. And they had the whole world with each other. And it was just them, just one another. And their love was so great, they wanted to extend outside of themselves, and they wanted to create a life, to have a child. And in this extraordinary darkness with this kid in a locked room, there was no world out there. There was no somebody for me to find. I really got to experience what it is to be completely alone. And in this dream, there's two worlds. The world outside is deeply confused. It's noisy. It's removed from this tranquility, this peace. And this king and this queen, they had this love and this world to themselves, and they shared. And it was just them, each other, and this baby. The fear starts to increase from 1,000 to about 10,000. Because that took me somewhere deeper in me that I was not ready for. Because that kid in the dark room was taken to a dream, and that dream was extraordinarily light, and it had its own thing inside of it that was very, very much alive. And then that continued to zoom out, and it showed me myself. And as it showed me myself, it was a reflection of me through the dream. And when I saw that reflection of me through the dream, there was something I could not understand, and everything, up, down, left, right, night, day, became relative. And then that fear started to pick up even more from 1,000 to 10,000. And I didn't think I was going to be able to do it, but I noticed that my body can handle it, that I had the capacity to experience this. What is the one thing that I know to be true is the question I asked myself. The present moment. Present moment is true. I can surrender to the present moment. I closed my eyes. For 54 minutes, I was in an unbroken meditation. There were perceivable demons, and they serve a function to help you go into the mouth of your soul, and that nothingness, that perceivable nothingness. From the trap boy in the room to me in that small little village town on the second floor of this tiny hotel, which is nobody in it other than me and the person that's there, but he seems to live a little bit further away from the hotel. I was locked in with myself deeper than I've ever been. 54 minutes I was meditating. I open my eyes, the room clears, and there's a feeling in my chest. Have you ever seen those fire pokers? Imagine one of those at a forge or a blacksmith, and it was heated in the flames. And in that flames, it was pressed right into my chest, burning right here, and burning and burning and burning and burning. And this feeling was so strong. It was the strongest feeling I ever had in my life. And I couldn't stop. And I had to write. What I wrote down was something that came to mind. It was a feeling because I was in the complete and total state of nothingness. I fell through a glass. I was completely alone. And I was coming closer to something, the most alone I've ever been. And it was what I sought my whole life. And it's what I've never known that has always been true, that has been with me everywhere I went, everywhere I go. Every single day I've lived of my life, it's been there. And it's burning. And I'm like, what is this feeling? I've never felt anything like this. And what went from a great terror went to an extraordinary peace. And I was like, well, this feels like nothingness. It's like, and what came to mind was the biblical quote, in the beginning, God creating the heavens and the earth. The earth was astonishingly empty. There was nothingness upon the face of the deep. God's presence hovered above the waters. That hover above the waters was something so interesting, is that there was a component of the feminine in relationship to these waters, and that there's a consciousness in relationship to creation that has to do with these waters. And so the way that it's described is like these two things are coming, these two parallel lines have been parallel, and they touch, and there's this spark. And I felt that in my soul. What I actually was looking for was this love. And I met my soul when I was most alone. I was able to discover something that has always been there. And it was like I take it with me everywhere I go. There were some very, very powerful visuals and images, and I can get a little bit more into that, yet I want to get more into what exactly this helped me find was the very thing that I've been looking for my whole life, and it was created through a really deep underlying trauma. That deep underlying trauma was a pursuit of love, and that pursuit of love continued, right? And it's like, well, even after you give it to yourself on a superficial level, there's things on it like maybe a foundational level, divine level. And the question of the trauma and taking it down to its divine level to be able to actually feel and experience that existing inside of me, well, it gave me more than a peace, but I could describe it to you. It was the two parallel lines meeting at one point, and as those two parallel lines met at that point, there was an explosion of light from it, almost like an event horizon kind of color, an amber yellowish white light that's coming through that. And there was two images that were placed right next to each other. One was of a body and a perfectly geometrical light sparkle coming through its heart as it silhouetted the whole body with another perfectly silhouetted light. As there was a darkness that surrounded that body and that silhouetted light, followed by another light silhouetting that darkness in its perfect geometrical sparkle. And it was like, what is love on a divine level? What is the very thing that has created all of existence that I'm created too? And what exactly animated the creation of existence is love. That love on a divine level echoes through every small action we have, and you might call that romance. And it speaks to this. And what it speaks to was a choice. And it's... In that space, everything was too incomprehensible, yet experienceable. And it was teaching me. This was the love I've been seeking, is the love that I found. And I've had it all along. This brought up to me the question of intimacy and relationships with people, is that me being alone with me allowed me to see into myself beyond what I perceivably knew myself to be made of. And that was terrifying because look, it gave away everything else that was Naftali up to that point before that happened. And no, there was no drugs throughout this process. This was something that I've been working on for a very, very long time. And I was ready, or else it wouldn't have called. Forrest wouldn't have called. This is what intimacy looks like, real intimacy. And to be able to surrender to that unknown and to interact with the feminine in the nature of trying to control the uncontrollable, to be placed into a point where I could be so alone that I could have myself look into me beyond what I knew myself to be, to the point where I've developed awareness of my soul. I know I can share that with someone else, because I did find what I was looking for on this trip. What I found was love, and true love is found alone. True adventure is taken alone. The true meaning of life is embraced alone. You are not trapped when you are alone. You are free. I was set free. I was set free of a meaningless life, a nihilistic existence, something that I knew I could feel inside of me, something that is inside every one of us. There was no left or right, up or down. There was a singularity. That thing was immutable, undying, true, and can be experienced. Hard for me to sleep that night because it was so powerful. I woke up the next morning and I knew my journey was done. Time to go home. I had nowhere to be. Because I had nowhere to be, I can go anywhere. And I said, sure, where do I want to go from here? Sweden. I found this playful nature reinvigorated. I found the love I was looking for was with me. What was a need turned to a want, and a want with a burning curiosity. Everything that I understood about psychology, everything that I understood about everything that I've spoken about, every single little bit of experience that I've had, every book that I've read, gone. And I've returned to what's most true in me, my essence, my intuition, and a burning curiosity. I sit with the feeling. I'm not afraid of being alone. I turn to being alone. The love is there. The awareness of a soul. I never thought that I'd be able to be so honored to have an ability to create a connection with that. Stop freaking out about the hotels, where I was going to be, what I needed to do, how I needed to say, what I needed to create. I had a curiosity. And with that curiosity, I would sit in the face of that love that has always been there, and it would speak to me, and it would show me, and it would reveal to me, and it's everywhere that I go, and it came with me anywhere that I went, because it's always been with me. And it was like I was liberated from the world of having to constantly escape one prison and this external church. And when all of those rooms closed and the people left the city and that great terror took over and it turned up as deep as it needed to, I could surrender to the one thing that is true, the present moment. In that present moment, I was able to find something that is with me everywhere that I go. I noticed that there was a sense of peace, not trying to control everything. I let go of control. I surrendered. And I discovered the love I've been looking for my whole life. I want connection. I yearn for connection. I desire connection. That love I have. That love I have. Oh, that can't be controlled. At the end of the trip, I spoke with my coach and I told him, I don't know what I need to do. I don't have a direction. I don't have an aim. Who I need to be. But I do know. It's already worked out. It's all worked out. I could show up. I'm left with my curiosity, my intuition, and a deep, deep burning desire to create. When I returned home, this has come with me. When I was in Scandinavia, it was with me there too. When I was in Germany, it was with me. When I was in Italy, it was with me. When I was in France, it was with me. I realized the nature of being afraid. Being able to face those fears, and how willing are you to get lost with them, to the point where you are left alone. When you're left alone, you're left with the things that you carry on with you, that weigh on your shoulders, and they're the beliefs about yourself. Maybe you don't have the foundation to seek that for you. I wouldn't recommend going to the forest and doing that whole trip unless you feel deeply inclined towards a necessary revelation that you slowly take steps towards, and having to control everything was really to prevent the integration of this love at a level beyond my understanding. And the nature of human relationships and the ability to create an intimate one is to be able to push each other through the limitations of what you believed was true about you and how deep you can go within yourself. And being alone was the beginning of me being able to recognize the nature of this deeply intimate relationship between us and the divine. I was able to discover my soul. And when I discovered my soul, I realized that the fear of being alone is what most people take into their intimate relationships, and it's what they take into their business, it's what they take into their pursuits. And this has given me the utmost amount of clarity, but it's clarity without a direction. It's a state of being. It's a manifestation of my essence, and a fundamental liberation of my being. The love I have been looking for is the love I've had my whole life, that I was too afraid to face within myself. You want to find love, you need to be alone. From beginning to end, probably the longest I've ever had for a facing the camera video. And I don't know how it's going to do, yet the nature of this state of tranquility and understanding has reunited me with a state of play. And I recognize that when a person is removed from their playful essence, they're removed from their ability to learn. It's interchangeable. You can't remove one from the other. And this burning curiosity is to be able to sit in the face of this love that you've never known that it existed as it's always been, and to let it teach you. The great weight that I bear for so long feels lifted off my shoulders, and it was in the place I would least expect to find it. Adventure, love, meaning, freedom. They are all found alone.